So last year there was this documentary called RBG, which I never got around to seeing. But it's about this woman called Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's apparently a pretty big deal. And this movie is also about her, and I thought this was actually gonna be a biopic. And it kinda is, but not really. It feels like the focus is a lot more on the case she takes to court than on her as a character. And the case she takes to court is essentially about lawful gender discrimination. She argues that everyone should be equal under the law, and that these laws that discriminate are unconstitutional. And well, there is almost an hour of movie before she even takes the case, but I still think the first hour is just more there as context and introduction to the character. So we know exactly who she is and what she stands for, and what she's been up against in her life before. What drives her to do this. And yeah, if the movie is factual, she was actually up against a lot in her day. She was one of only a few women studying law at Harvard, while at the same time being a mother and a wife, back in the 50s. And there were some other hurdles too. They really piled on the drama there at one point. Most of which I'm sure is true, but it still felt a bit excessive. Like, we get it. But I guess the point was to show that this is a tenacious woman who won't be stopped. She knows what she wants and she's going after it no matter what. And I gotta say, I admire and envy people like this, with seemingly limitless energy, that can just keep going and juggle 8 things at once. But at the same time, I don't get it. I don't understand how these people function. They must be built very differently from me. But I guess you have to be built differently to make a real change in this world. And if you're a woman up against the archaic and outdated system of the 50s, you've got your work cut out for yourself. And she definitely worked hard to get things done. So that kind of passion and work ethic is definitely admirable. And you can't really help but to sympathize and root for her in this movie, even though as a personality, she's probably not the most likable or charismatic character around, or that interesting either. It's her drive and her accomplishments that are interesting and inspiring. And you know what? I enjoyed the first half, with all the character stuff. But it almost felt rushed, because they had to cram in decades of her life into it. But once it got to the court case, that's when it really got interesting to me. Because I've always liked these kind of courtroom dramas, where the lawyers have to find loopholes and interesting ways to interpret the law, to make the law work in their favor, and to argue that their case makes more sense. That's always been fascinating to me, especially when you're up against something as ridiculous as this. I mean, the arguments the state makes in this just don't make any sense. And I get that this is coming from a person who grew up in the 90s, in one of the most equal countries in the world when it comes to gender. Like, I just grew up with the notion that women and men can pretty much do anything they want. They're essentially the same, right? Although physically different. And some people are obviously better suited for certain tasks than others, mentally and physically. But if a woman wanted to be president or a firefighter, they could. Or if a man wanted to be a stay-at-home dad or a nurse, they could. This is just a given to me, so looking back just 50 years, things like this seem so ridiculous. But that's just reality, and I guess that's just how things go. Things change slowly. And in time, everything we do now could seem just as absurd. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie. I thought it was pretty good. From a filmmaking perspective, it's fine. Sorta whatever. But definitely not bad. But it's a good story with solid acting. Solid everything really, and just a decent movie. But would I recommend it? Sure, it's always good to remind ourselves how far we've actually come in just a few decades, and to remember that progress takes time. So check it out. Or don't. I'm not your dad, but I am trying to sell out, so consider liking, subbing, hitting that bell, and supporting me on Patreon. Because I really need to hire a crack team of lawyers to make me some money. And hey, why not drop a comment below or check out another review? I'd appreciate it. Thanks.